Good morning and welcome to WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the scenes and behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Justin Elicker makes our community tick. He's the mayor. On the heels of introducing his first proposed city budget, he's in the WNHH studio to fill us in on what's going on at City Hall. Thanks for coming in, Justin.
Hey, good to see you, Paul.
Great to see you, too. And, even though most of the world is finding other things to freak out about, like coronavirus or who's might win the Democratic presidential nomination, people in New Haven are talking about your first budget, which was your first, as you knew, was going to be your first big test as mayor. So I'm going to start with a trick question. There was a New Haven Independent article I want to summarize, written by a reporter named Thomas. And it's about the first proposed budget by a mayor. Mayor proposing the first budget a few months after coming to office. Mayor proposes 3.8% tax increase, so very different from yours. The mayor is going to cut fire and police overtime, $1.8 million. The mayor said the proposed budget offers, quote, a responsible approach to the current financial moment while charting a responsible course for the future. Because of decisions made in the past, the city faces a large number of fixed costs which are rising, including debt service, pension and medical benefits, and contractual increases. Quote, the mayor said the budget does not rely on one-time revenues like the sale of city property, nor does it rely on potentially devastating long-term deals like selling debt.
This is rich.
Okay. So I was just reading to you from an article by a reporter named Thomas in the New Haven Independent. If you would guess, what was that about?
You mean what time period?
What do you think that was an article about? Ronnie Williams is watching. Hi, Ron.
It sounds like an article about so I'm presuming Thomas is maybe Thomas McMillan.
Bingo!
And
all right, you're like a
Thomas
contestant on Game
McMillan
Show.
certainly was not a reporter when DeStefano started, and you said it was the first term of the mayor.
We're narrowing this down quickly.
I think Thomas McMillan probably would have not been born when DeStefano started. Maybe he would have been born. He would have been like 4 years old or something. So I presume it was Mayor Harp's first budget. Is that correct?
Was Mayor Harp's first budget in 2014, and Thomas Breen, a New Haven Independent reporter, wrote an article that was very similar this week.
Yeah, even the debt service, the no one-time fixes, really interesting.
And I found that so interesting.
Narrative.
And I don't even make a point from it except this, which is that it's hard being the mayor in New Haven when you have to have a budget. And some of the same challenges face every mayor comes in. The only mayor I've covered who did not say they discovered a whole lot of problems when they came in from the last mayor was John DeStefano, who in fact did inherit a lot of financial problems, but didn't mention it. Frank Logue had a press conference about Ben DeLito. Ben DeLito had a press conference about Frank Logue. John Daniels had a press conference about it.
Just to be clear, I did not have a press conference about Mayor Harp, so I'm trying to
look forward.
Yeah, look forward.
But the parallels are that mayors often come in and really want to do the budget right. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have to do a modest tax increase, even though it's unpopular. They have to cut some stuff, rethink city departments, and deal with one-time revenues, because that's not a way to solve the budget. As mayors stay in office, including DeStefano, they start pursuing ways to kind of get money up front that put us in debt later. Mm-hmm. And then even though they might not think it's good to have one-time revenues, they just have to balance the budget each year, and they say, well, instead of laying off these 10 teachers, I'm going to budget. So what do you think when you hear that old thing and article and hear it sounds so much like the speech you gave this week?
Well, first of all, it's quite interesting to think about the historical perspective of things. I think it's, clearly, it's not the narrative that's actually, or not what has actually happened over recent years. As far as if that was the first time budget, and I don't recall what Mayor Harp's first budget actually looked like. There's the speech that leadership gives, and getting into the nitty gritty of the budget.
Well, that actually she added positions to the mayor's office and things like that. People were very upset about it.
And so I think if you, again, I don't know the details about that specific budget, but if you look at my budget that I'm presenting, I'm cutting a lot of things, and proposing a tax increase as well. It was very difficult for us to make the decision to make the cuts that I'm proposing we make. And I'm trying to balance our ability to deliver services to residents and make sure that we have taxes that are within some sort of reason that we can continue to attract investment in the city and support our residents. I can say that moving forward, I will continue to adhere to what I've said all along from day one, that I'm not going to balance the budget with budget gimmicks, with debt refinancing, because that's the very thing that got us into this problem.
And just to be fair, you did oppose when the Stefan administration tried to sell parking meter revenue for decades in the future, which was another way of doing a sort of form of scuba toss.
Modernization. I opposed the sale of Wall and High Street. And frankly, a couple of those things were on the table this time, and I said no.
What were they?
I don't want to get into the specifics of what was proposed by the hospital and the university, but they proposed one-time purchases of city assets, and I said no, that's not the way to go.
Now, do you remember the university bought the Broadway traffic island for 99 years?
I do. I remember that.
So that's what they came to the table with. And so what did you say?
I said no, and I don't think that there's no circumstance where we should sell an asset. I don't think that we should take asset sales off the table at all. Mm-hmm. There are some things that may not be productive for us to use.
Like we might sell vacant buildings.
Yeah, we sell vacant properties. We sell school buildings from time to time, those things. But I don't think that they should be sold under the context of filling a budget gap. If anything, those should be tied to a policy decision that makes sense for the city, or tied to specifically reducing the structural problems in the budget. So if the fund, and we should be given a significant amount of money for whatever these assets may be.
Well, if you're not doing it to
but
try
they
to
should
fill
reduce
a gap,
the debt service,
you
right?
have better leverage for a better price if you're not doing it out of desperation.
Correct.
So
and
that
too often we have our hand out at these times where we're pretty desperate. And I was looking at what my options were on the table, and any good negotiator knows that you need to find your BATNA is a negotiation clause. It's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, I think is what it is. And so you want to look at all of your options on the table before going into any sort of conversation, because you want to say, am I willing to go the other route and forego what the proposal is? And my other route was a
tax increase
and deep cuts. And I wasn't willing to go with, we'll buy this thing on the cheap.
So they're willing to sell you something that you don't want to identify. That would have been
opposite.
Some quick money.
They're willing to buy something.
Right,
correct.
And you know what I do? People are putting comments. I'm just going to read them fast, just so because otherwise I'll lose them on the screen. Rodney Williams: most city employees and fire department don't live in the city, so any taxes raised don't impact them. These concerns have always been about them and not about the residents. Tabisa Rich, the mayor and I will be singing Summertime one of these days. Check if he's been rehearsing, although I know he has a lot on his plate. You've been practicing Summertime?
I have not been practicing Summertime.
She is really good. She sang that live here in the studio.
Oh, no way. All right.
Tabisa is awesome.
I could do it off the cuff, though.
You can?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how good it's going to be, but to Rodney's comment, so fair enough. The police and fire, a lot of folks live out of New Haven. There's a lot of folks that do live in New Haven that are on our police and fire department, so it's not all. But I do think it's a fair, a fair analysis that for a police and fire department to say, to criticize, and I haven't really heard a lot of this actually, but the leadership for making cuts to police and fire, while at the same time the suburban towns generally don't pay.
But you could turn that around and say they don't live in the city, do they? Here we have enough cops. You can look at it both ways. Patricia Melton, thanks for listening. Patricia, both Yale and Yale New Haven extended an olive branch to Mayor Elicker to work on a big idea. You have any thoughts about a big idea, issue, or project that we'd all get behind and work on?
I would love to work on big ideas with the university and the hospital. It's got to be meaningful to address our structural financial problems. And a lot of the good things that the hospital and the university have done have had a lot of impact on our community. But they're not addressing, they're always additive. They're always adding, like New Haven Promise, Yale Homebuyers, for example. They add something new. We can't fund the very services that are the basic expectation that any government should, any resident should have of their government. A nurse in every school, librarian in every school.
So you're not going to, because what mayors have tended to do is they took the heat off the university mostly from public demand for taxes by signing some kind of new ambitious program that had impact on the city.
Right.
And then for 10 years, people didn't really raise the issue of taxes anymore.
It's a nice thing to do, and you have a ribbon cutting, and it has an impact on the community, but it doesn't address what I think is the root to many of our problems in the city is our inability to fund the things that help address income inequality in our city. Schools is a great example, and I think that there is potential for the university and the hospital to partner with us on schools, but it has to be connected to our inability to pay for the very things that we should be paying for now.
Talking to Justin Elicker, Mayor of New Haven, coming on the air and taking your questions and mine about his new budget. So I have a very naive thought on this line.
Go for it.
The reason I think it's naive because I'm not in government, so I haven't been in your conversations. I was thinking about this walking to work. What if the city and the university and the hospital said, okay, we disagree about this issue on taxes, but we have a common interest in New Haven have enough revenue. Could we form a high-powered squad to go lobby like crazy and pull strings publicly and privately to get the state to more fully fund pilot?
I love the idea.
In practice, is it naive? I mean, when they want something in the legislature, they get pretty high-powered lobbying going. Anytime we've tried to tax them or change their special exemption that isn't that significant about the mixed buildings of public and private uses, they really have a lot of money and a lot of influence up there.
So I've actually had some conversations with people in the know about this strategy, and it may be a possibility on the table. The problem is that when the university and the hospital go lobbying the state for more money for the city, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people at the state will say, well, we just gave you a huge break, the hospital. You just got a huge injection of revenue because of the settlement, the hospital settlement. And Yale University, you have an incredible amount of funding, and your main reason why the city of New Haven has 56% of our property is non-taxable. I think it comes off as a little bit unjust if those institutions are asking the state to pay more. Now, the hospital says they pay $300 million in state taxes, and I presume they're talking about Yale Health and not the hospital, first of all. And so, I presented on, and if you give me a moment to explain, this is a little bit complicated, but I presented on Monday 2 graphs, one of the university and one of the hospital. And how
I saw the hospital didn't even show up.
So I picked Yale New Haven Hospital's revenue. Yale New Haven Health revenue is many times the amount of the hospital's revenue because they own many. Yeah. So I presume that, and I haven't looked into these numbers, but I presume that the state taxes that they are saying they pay $300 million.
So let's talk off the record and privately and not publicly on radio here. Okay. They do some stuff that you and I would not.
We should just whisper.
Right. Yeah. They do stuff we would not approve of to get government to do what it wants. And not that we should pursue anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they want to get the legislature to get New Haven off its back by increasing and doing things that you don't see publicly to get them beyond these public statements of we already gave you a break, and given that it's a just argument that we only get reimbursed for less than half of the value of that property, you don't think that kind of joint effort could work?
So show me the path, and I'm happy to work with them in an appropriate and legal way. I'm not. Mm-hmm. You described something that sounded a little bit shady. At the end of the day, I think, I've said this over and over again, that everyone bears some responsibility for this. New Haven subsidizes, in my view, the suburbs. It subsidizes the hospital. It subsidizes the university. I've thought a lot about philosophically what's everyone's role in this, right? What's the right amount for people to pay? And the university and the hospital are nonprofits, but the suburbs come in, use the hospital. The university creates the leaders of the world, is innovating to help the world, but New Haven has to subsidize that with our non-taxable property.
Subsidizing a hedge fund at this point. But you had Peter Salve.
And the state as well.
I meant that really wasn't a joke. I do believe Yale has become a hedge fund that masquerades as a university. But we can go on that another subject. Yeah. Peter Salve, the president, wrote, "I do not believe New Haven's books should be balanced largely by Yale University writing dramatically larger checks. I do not believe New Haven's current financial problems are the result of a lack of generosity from Yale. We continue to increase our voluntary payment, but not at the rate the mayor suggested." What did they increase? 1.2, the two institutions together?
1.2.
Together.
No, the hospital, 0.
Mm-hmm.
The hospital has contributed $2.8 million. and the university increased its payment by
From what to
$1.2
what?
million. From the university, I think they're at $13 million.
Okay, we got
It's
somebody.
not exact, is it?
Justin Elicker, Dateline, New Haven, 103.5 FM, livestream.newhaven.org, just so I can keep up with these comments. William LaFella Manning, thank you for listening. William writes in, I have an idea. Rich, have Yale health care for taxpayers in New Haven. My wife and I paid $9,000 annually for health care without out-of-pocket expense. If we problems as a family of 5 can reduce that to $5,000 annually, we'd be more than happy to absorb that 3.5% tax increase. Is he saying, I'm sorry,
it sounds to me like he's saying
let us all
that
enroll in Yale New Haven Health Care.
Yeah, the hospital could provide.
Or Yale, I think.
So, for example, the university has a healthcare plan where all of their employees go to, or are part of a narrow network within the university. And
I cried when my wife stopped working for Yale and we were no longer on their health plan.
Right. It's a great health plan.
Costs a lot of money.
We've had some conversation with the hospital about the hospital's ability potentially to save us money on our own municipal healthcare costs. So, we have a cost in the city of around $100 million in healthcare. Employees pay a monthly portion of that. And so it's a net of around $84 million. In healthcare, so it's a huge percentage of our budget. We have a $550 million budget, so that is huge. What's that? A fifth?
So how could they help through buying power if you network together and dealing with insurers?
Correct, and we've had some negotiations. They've helped a little bit to reduce that cost to us, but there is some opportunity there, and we're having conversations with them about that. I think the challenge is that only moves the dial a little bit, and the question.
Right, we're not realistically going to get for $84 million. Maybe we'll get for $10 million.
Right, and healthcare costs continue to rise, so it might just be keeping our healthcare costs curve a little bit less of an increase.
Until Bernie Sanders becomes president, nobody pays anything for healthcare. Andrea Donner says, limit or leverage the sale of buildings to future investors, turning properties into an exempt property to avoid paying taxes. Oh, Harry, you just got rid of it from me. I was trying to read that. Let me try to get that. So did you follow what she was saying there?
Maybe she was saying remove tax abatement or new developments.
Okay, limit or leverage the sale. Harry, please let me keep this on the screen. Okay, sorry. Limit or leverage the sale. I'm sorry, I keep trying to read this. And limit or oh boy, let me go to somebody else.
We'll come back to it. Okay.
Limit or leverage the sale of buildings to future investors, turning properties into tax-exempt property to avoid paying taxes. Zoning ordinances need some serious changes. Kiss Clem says, I've been trying to reach out to the mayor in regards to all my recent gun violations in my community. Does that ring a bell?
Happy to chat with you. There's a lot of people reaching out, and we're going through the list as quickly as we can.
Okay.
Who was that, Clarence?
Kiss Clem.
Huh, okay.
Okay, and then I had something up here that just disappeared from Brian Jenkins saying, why do we need all these cops if crime is down? Is that because that's part of what keeps crime down? I mean, you did cut a lot of open positions, but we were talking about, how many was it, 38 positions fewer?
Or 80.
But that are empty, you're not going to fill.
Oh, you mean for police?
Yeah.
Police. So I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but there are around 400. I actually can pull it up.
We have under 400 filled right now.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated, but for a long time, the city had 495 police positions. Many of those were not filled. And then in recent years, that number, Mayor Harp reduced that number to a lower number. I can look it up in a sec if you want. And I've proposed reducing that number even more. But I think it's very important to be clear. Currently in the force, we have 300 and I think it's 42 positions.
And you're saying cut it down to like
filled.
400 filled or
406.
So it's still going to be hard to fill those because there are some.
Correct.
Even though we've lost.
So and
cops.
Some of those are $1 positions too.
Right. So even though we've lost cops, we're going to continue to lose cops. So it's going to be hard to even fill as many as you have there.
Correct. So if you follow me, there's 406 positions in the budget, but some of those 406 are only put in the budget for $1. And so that means that this year we don't plan on filling those positions.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the number we have is around 383.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be lucky to fill those, to tell you.
And we're working to bring one class in that will probably be around 25 to 30 people that will start in May, and a second class in that's about the same size in the fall.
And then you're going to lose a few.
Correct, through attrition. So it's been very difficult to fill these positions. In part, we had a lot of police leave the force for early retirement, and because they were concerned about the contract that was being negotiated. The contract's finalized now, in part because it's just in general harder to find police officers or people that want to be police officers today. And it's a high bar. It's a high bar to become a police officer.
As it should be.
Correct.
Brian Jenkins, the poor should never bear responsibility. And then someone whose name I can't, just disappeared from the screen, says, what is happening to address the runaway costs of union contracts? Expenditure is a bigger issue than revenue. This is going to be a problem that New Haven is unwilling to address. So as you found out, as you knew from being an alder, that the biggest fixed costs are union contracts that you can't just come in and change.
Correct. And the biggest union contracts are police and fire that were just finalized a month or two before I started.
So were you left the way Tony Hart was left, with a contract with the fire union that in return for getting their endorsement for re-election, you gave them too much and saddled the next mayor?
So I didn't get their endorsement. You're saying that Mayor Harp got their endorsement.
Right, and then gave them a contract that you're saddled with now?
Did the fire department and the police department endorse the mayor?
Remember.
I don't think they did.
Brett Ilhan Hoover gave that question. Thank you.
But I think it's a good point. I think we need to balance what we promise to employees with our ability to pay their pensions down the road, right? And that's a good thing for employees to have a balanced promise. And it's more difficult for me to have a lot of influence over the police and fire contracts because they've just been settled a few months ago. And those are the main drivers of some of the overall costs on the employee side, because that's just where the most employees are. We have 5 unions that are up for negotiation this year. There are not as many people in those bargaining units, so it doesn't have a huge impact overall on the city's finances. And then we'll have teachers coming up next year. And so there'll be an opportunity for us to talk about ways that we can make sure that we're providing appropriate benefits, but at the same time making sure that we can pay.
All right, so your first big test with your first budget, your next test can come in labor negotiations when contracts expire.
Or coronavirus, whichever one comes first, right?
And you've been working on that too, because when you're mayor, you get to predict some things you deal with and other things come out of the blue.
Right.
Like your first couple of weeks with coronavirus. We're talking to Mayor Justin Elicker on WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. So, Justin, it was a tough decision to have a tax increase. You knew people would be very upset, even though it's not a huge tax increase. It is a tax increase.
Mm-hmm. Coupled with a lot of cuts.
With a lot of cuts. What else would you have had to cut to avoid a tax increase? I don't mean like, say, get rid of the whole board ed. What were you really looking at that you just decided, I'm not going to cut that. I'm going to bite the bullet and ask people to pay more in taxes?
So we could have done layoffs, and I'm happy to talk about that in a sec. But
isn't it true with layoffs you don't get the benefit for most of the first year because of...
So we'll jump to it right now then.
Yeah.
We could, and with the other things that we could have cut, we spend $1.4 million in homeless shelters. Mm-hmm. We spend around $1 million in youth programs, 800,000, I think. Don't quote me on that number. I got to double check it. But and you start to get into the cuts of either people that are in jobs, and we can talk about the pros and cons of that. Or major service cuts to vulnerable populations in the city. Both of those are pretty tough. And so the layoffs question, there's a lot of complicated things that are connected with layoffs. One is you don't get a financial benefit in that year. You don't get a huge financial benefit in that year because you'll be paying unemployment, and so you don't get a lot of the financial benefits immediately. That doesn't mean we're going to continue to have these financial problems in the future. So it doesn't mean that that idea should be taken off the table just for that reason. The second is a lot of times, well, first of all, our city staff is so reduced at this point. This is the lowest. I don't have very long historical numbers.
Are we under 4,000 now?
I'll check the number.
I know we're up to 5,000 once.
But I suspect that this is the lowest we've had in decades in number of city employees. And it's funny, the emails that I'm getting, this a lot of people that are understandably upset about a tax increase. And then there's people that are saying, I can't believe you're cutting police positions, and I can't believe you're cutting this, and why are the police not pulling people over?
And, you got rid of vacant positions, because another trick, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, when you lay off people, there are all these union rules that often let other people bump into positions they're not qualified for. One of my first articles I wrote about the DeLito administration. In DeLito's first term, he laid off people. And the new Spanish-speaking librarian never spoke Spanish and was never going to speak Spanish. And to me, that kind of said it all.
Right.
You do work within a very limited universe, and it's good we have collective bargaining. Unions should exist, and they should fight for their workers. It means that it's more complicated to run government.
Right. So the person that you lay off is the position that, right? Yeah. Because someone that has seniority can bump a person that maybe in another position. So it's hard to know exactly what the overall impact is of layoffs. And given that we already have very, very low city staff, it's much simpler, much more financially effective to reduce vacant positions. And I think that's, some people say, oh, that was easy. They're just vacant positions, so we don't need them anyway. But a lot of these vacant positions were recent vacant positions, right? Like, librarians, for example, PSAP is
that's public
people that are answering
center.
The phone. Some of the police positions.
So you're still talking about doing more with less.
Public Works and Parks. There's several positions there, and health departments. So these were very hard conversations we were having in City Hall about, can we really get the job done and do not more with less, but a little bit less with a lot less, right?
So before I said that Brian Jenkins asked the question, he had not asked that. Rodney Williams had. Brian asks, if Toni Harp's 11% tax increase was so egregious, why would you increase her tax increase by an additional 3.56%? Raising taxes is easy. Why not reduce the size of local government?
I did both. And I think the difference is that, and if you look at what happened 2 years ago, the city refinanced debt. And in 1 year, they had to only pay $30 million in debt service. Last year, $44 million in debt service. This year, I have to find $57 million. So that increase is significant. And I am not proposing doing another refinance that kicks the can down the road. I'm not proposing these one-time fixes. And so it means that there's some serious growing pains. I'm dealing with an honest budget. And that has not been done in many, many years.
So revenues, it's tough to find new revenues in our control. Let me throw out two ideas. Tell me if they're all wet. The state is not allowed us to do two things Toni Harp had proposed. One was to put a 1% sales tax in the city that the state would connect we get back. Another was to put a levy on restaurant meals and entertainment. I think that added up to about 10, 15 million a year, which is not huge. But we need enabling legislation from the state, and correct. They won't give us. I asked the state legislators, how come we can't just get that if we just want to attack ourselves? And they say because even Democrats from the suburbs don't want to be on record for having voted in favor of a tax increase, even if it's someone else.
We're advocating for that this session. The municipal option to increase. We would like the increase to be everywhere, but if there's not the willingness and political will at the Capitol, we'd like at least the option for us to increase by 1% the tax on food and beverage at restaurants only, not at grocery stores or anything like that. And I think the estimate is much lower than that. It's a couple $1 million a year, but still.
I'm talking about a complete 1% sales tax.
So that's another good option.
That's where I thought I got the $10 million from.
That perhaps the food and beverage one is a little bit.
And then if you add entertainment.
Right. Yeah. So I think that we need more tools for us to collect revenue because we're heavily relying on the real estate taxes. And most other states do not have municipalities spending the kind or needing to rely on the real estate taxes as such a large percentage of their budget. They have other service taxes. And
so why can't we get this done in Hartford? What's blocking it?
So we are working to push working with our delegation to push the approval of these things. And I think it's about priority. It's about building the right coalition. I met with the mayors of around 8 other cities yesterday to talk about how we can strategize to make sure that our cities, particularly cities that have a significant percentage of non-taxable property, can effectively fund our governments. And so we're looking at how we can work together to push the state to pay us what I think that we rightfully deserve because we're providing so many services to challenging communities.
And we're talking about budget with Mayor Justin Elicker, WNHHFM's Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live stream, newhaven.org. And folks, thanks for all these questions. Justin, I'll go real kitchen table here. So in our house, we're kind of pro-tax. That we don't mind paying more taxes. I think America should tax people more, especially upper income, which we're not.
It's too bad I can't just choose to increase taxes on the pro-tax people.
Yeah, or wealthy people. But in New Haven, it's trickier, as you know, because in New Haven, we can't just print money, and we're beholden to the state and federal government. People really are hurting. There's a question. But our tax increase, we figured out, comes to only $200-something bucks. Mm-hmm. Which is fair if it means teachers don't get laid off. But
it's also fair if you have an income that covers the $200, right?
And my wife said, you know how easily we can make that money back in no time is if GoNetspeed expands fiber optic cable service 3 blocks. So one of your supporters lives 3 blocks from me from the campaign. I'm so mad because he got it. And he said, you guys can sign up too. And we found out in Westville, this company that's laying fiber optic cable as an alternative to Comcast and Frontier hadn't yet moved. They're moving very slowly. All of us could save a lot of money and have faster web service, easily covering the tax increase, and it'd be new economic opportunities in low-income neighborhoods if we could massively get fiber optic cable. As you know, all over the country, including Connecticut, cable companies and phone companies have been fighting the fiber optic companies to not let them have access to poles or digging underground to lay this cable. So it's going very slowly. The Hart administration had years worth of quiet fights in court with Comcast and Frontier to try to get this expanded. I actually think this could be a way you can help people get back some money and create some economic opportunity in low-income neighborhoods. Any thoughts on that?
Cool idea. I'll look into it.
This is a big thing. There was a Harvard law professor wrote a book. I'll give it to you called Fiber Cable. She believes the whole country's being held back. There was a lower-income community pharmacy company called Wilson, North Carolina, that just did publicly owned fiber optic cable when everyone forgot about it. Instantly, they got hundreds of new jobs, tons of new tax revenue, and then the companies went to the state legislature to pass a bill that does not allow any local community to do what they did because it created so much opportunity, and they're doing this at every state level. There's a war on to preserve monopolies and duopolies.
Our economic development department is aware of this, and I don't yet know a lot of the details of it, but it seems like from what I understand from my conversation with Mike Piscatelli, that it makes a lot of sense. It's just
I always wondered whether one of these add-on press release ribbon-cutting Yale projects could be they partner with the housing authority at a border neighborhood like Dixbo, where there's properties on both sides, to do a fiber optic project aimed at getting new business and employers in. Seth Poole, who ran against you for mayor, but did in the comment section praise your budget. Why propose the elimination of Green Pass when we are on the cusp of a Green New Deal? For the city-state policy is the cornerstone of a local Green New Deal model for the state to follow. Thank you, Seth, for that question. Let me explain it to people. So people like me who have hybrid cars get to park for free downtown, and we love it. And for years, I've thought we shouldn't be allowed to. I was a hypocrite because I made use of it. But I always thought that people who have hybrid cars don't need the brake, and it costs the city money. But as Seth points out, government policy is everywhere trying to be greener. So is it not true that promotes that? Does it really get people to buy hybrid cars to not have to pay parking meters? And did you do anything else in this budget, softball question here, to address climate change?
Yeah, so I think that it is a subsidy for people that can afford to buy a hybrid car. I believe that the vast majority of people are not going to buy a hybrid car because they get free parking in New Haven. And a couple of people suggested to me when we were talking about eliminating this subsidy, well, what about doing it for electric cars? Because there's not as many people that have electric cars, and this one incentivizes
those are even more
people.
Expensive, though.
But those things are
like $100,000.
So it just doesn't seem like the right decision. People should be biking more. People should be buying hybrid cars if they need to buy a car. But I just don't think that they should get free parking downtown.
And anyway, you did find, and I wanted to ask you about that.
And I'm a green guy. Don't get me wrong.
You were pushed by the climate emergency group, which I love those kids in high school who were like pushing City Hall and going to 5-hour meetings.
Pushing hard.
And you found $550,000 from an existing capital budget to a 2-year capital budget to dedicate to a climate emergency fund.
Yeah. So
why aren't we spending that money on?
I did not make a lot of promises.
But you said you
when
would
I was
try to
running for mayor. And the promises I made was that I would work hard to get this budget under control and address the financial problems. Promises I made were that I would be as responsible as possible with people, to follow my ethical compass. And I did sign the pledge that they asked to sign. And I think it was $500,000 about of funding that we would put aside to address climate-related issues. And I think that the young people that are advocating for this had a different idea of how we would use that funding. But this is an area where I felt like we could save a lot of money by putting aside capital funds to invest in climate-related things that can actually,
like green roofs.
Yeah, and they can save us money on energy costs. They can save us money on.
But we weren't doing that anyway. Is that money was going to be spent on that anyway, or not? Like, what are we not spending capital budget money on?
I think that the important thing is that this will be in conversation with the climate task force that we're working to finalize.
So you're saying when we spend this capital money, it will help the environment?
Correct.
What are we not going to spend it on that we would have? What was it budgeted for that it might not go to?
So
or are you just saying it was going to general kind of improvements that will make sure?
Yeah, there's a lot of different improvements in the city's engineering department that we wanted to make sure that we put.
And you have an engineer who's gung ho on that.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Donna writes, and thanks everyone for these comments. I'm loving the comments.
It's really active today.
It really is.
Is it usually this active?
No, I think it's because of the tax increase.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and because you're the mayor. I agree, Paul. My tax increase was less than I expected if my property assessed value remains the same. But is there a plan to address see-click fix issues? And already that got a response from William Manning, who says that is a huge issue for me. See-click fix is a vehicle of frustration. I'm out of touch. What are they talking about? And thank you for those.
Thank you for bringing this up. And this is actually something that I was talking with folks in City Hall about yesterday, and have consistently talked with people about. I don't think that we have overall a very good system for keeping track of workflow. Keeping track of when someone calls or emails or posts something on See-Click Fix, calls City Hall and says, I need fill in the blank issue addressed, whether it's a pothole or whether it's a blight issue, whether it's a tree needing to be trimmed. We don't have a good way of tracking that specific issue, what employees have responded to the person, who the person is, what the contact information of the person is, and whether it's been addressed. And See-Click Fix is a much better way to address this than what we were doing before. However, it still has a lot of flaws. And
you're pointing out you need more detail on the follow-up rather than just saying addressed or not addressed.
There's a lot of things.
Every system needs to be updated based on real-life experience every few years. See-Click Fix started in New Haven. It's worldwide. Still New Haven, but bought by an outside company. Has that affected anything? Can you still call it?
My sense is no. I mean, I know that Ben Berkowitz is still fired up about it and advocating for it, and still running it, and cares very much about New Haven, lives here. But we're looking into how we can, without dramatically changing the system that many people have gotten used to using, how we can improve service. Because within limited resources, we can't trim every tree right away, but we can, I believe, with a better system to track who's asked for things and how city staff is addressing them, track and tell people, we can't trim your tree, but your number whatever on the list, and we plan on doing it at this point, and then follow up with you either automatically through an email or through a phone call. If you call someone else in City Hall because you can't find the person that's specifically responsible for your issue, they can look up your issue and tell you who's the responsible person and tell you the status of it. We don't really have a full capacity to do that across a wide range of issues in City Hall. And so we're working on that component of customer service and coming up with a better system to do that.
All right, I'm trying to keep on top of these comments. Justin Elicker, the mayor of New Haven, on Dateline New Haven, taking your questions, one and all. Now, here's a new thing to get used to being the mayor. Tony Arp had to use this. You get questions from Aaron Good. Aaron Good's questions are
I got
really
those before
informed.
Too. I get those.
They are very informed. You got to be in your game,
Yep.
and you got to be willing to say, which you are, which Tony was, which I always am, is like, gee, I don't know. Let me find out more about it, but they're great questions. As is this one. Thank you, Aaron. Regarding the Affordable Housing Fund, we've just created one in New Haven. We had the first deal where a developer puts money in so we could do it. Oakland, California has one. It was recently found that 2/3 of impact fees from developers for a similar affordable housing fund were either never collected or went missing. and not a single affordable unit was created in 3 years of the program. How will controls be implemented to make sure that does not happen in the neighborhood?
That sure sounds like a problem, Aaron.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Thank you, Aaron.
yeah. I'll look into it, but I think that's similar to controls in any fund in any department.
So now there's been this weird confluence of libertarians and some people on the left arguing that there's a bigger solution here that doesn't involve government versus other people on the left and the center, which is that we want more affordable housing, so we think that's forcing developers to do it or creating these fees to do it. Instead, if you just let them build, and meet the market,
Prices
you
go
will
down.
meet demand, it will keep prices down, and have other people not raise theirs. You know what I'm talking about? Other people say that's just theory. In real life, markets don't work the way they should in theory, and that people are getting priced out. Who's right?
It's like most of these things, I think it's a combination. I would say that one problem with just letting the market go is that you're more likely to have neighborhoods for the wealthy and neighborhoods for the poor. And that's not a good solution for anyone. And so I think that government can play a pretty strong role in making sure that, for example, downtown, if you let developers, like we're doing, frankly, right now, unless we have some leverage over the property, let the developers develop, you'll have downtown being a place where you'll only have $2,000, $2,500 a month apartments.
Except Nice Square, where half the units are
but that
subsidized.
was because we had some skin in the game and we required it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think
And it worked.
I don't want to live in a city where you have a neighborhood where there's all the rich people and then a neighborhood where there's all the not rich people. I don't think that allows us to break down barriers and learn from each other and improve our lives. I don't think it also would divide the services that are available to people, because you'll have stores that only locate in certain neighborhoods that are targeting a certain clientele. And I think that's just not an effective way to do things. So I think there is a role for government, but I also agree that there's other things that we could do. For example, there's a lot of people interested in tiny houses. And that's a way to increase the number of available units pretty quickly.
And that's a view that you're different from your predecessor. She doesn't like that, people living in squished spaces. Other people say that that's a way to keep it affordable and use vacant lots well, or help people add on to existing properties.
Yeah, and it's also how you do it, right? It's not just people living in squished spaces. It's about how the zoning is done so that it's done attractively and and regulated enough that you.
And it doesn't mean it's for everybody. Could be your mother-in-law apartment or
exactly
single person.
Exactly.
Gary Goslin, thanks for writing in, Gary. I think a first-time contribution from you here. Develop the waterfront with a target of revenue generation. Place a moratorium on property purchases by entities that will not pay taxes. You need to develop a steady income. Before you answer that, can I give a counter view from Gary's, even though I don't know that Gary's wrong, just a different way to think about it?
Mm-hmm.
When Yale develops a property that's been vacant, or Gateway Community College, a long vacant downtown property, it was producing almost nothing in taxes. When they make it worth a lot more and we get only 40% reimbursement, doesn't it still get us more revenue than we got before? If Yale builds on an underdeveloped property and we get a lot less than we think we should, aren't we still getting more than we got before?
Well, we're not
employing people.
You look at the amount that we get through pilot, and it's a very, very small fraction.
Well, let's take SOM. So that was not producing a lot of revenue.
It's so huge, right?
Right. So aren't we on balance making out better because they built there, even though we wish we got 100%?
I just don't think it's that simple. And also,
but it does take services. It takes water.
Was SOM non-taxable beforehand, that property? I don't know.
I don't know.
I presume Yale owned that, because I don't remember there was some.
You're right.
But we,
Gateway Community
there's
College.
Not an either.
There's an
or,
argument
right?
I had with the Answerson people at the Urban Design League. They were really against selling those downtown lots to Gateway Community College because it was nonprofit. My argument was, after Mally's went out of business on that property in Macy's, nothing happened there for decades, and we bribed people to build there, and they wouldn't. When Gateway came, we only got, 25, 30% of the revenue? But that was millions more than we got before, right? With people working. So should we just have waited for market conditions to change, and then we would have gotten a for-profit, or did just retail trends change? We couldn't get the old department store back.
I think again, it's a little bit of both, right? A lot of people say, oh, without Yale, we wouldn't have the, people say we'd be Bridgeport. I don't like to put
I like how you answer that. That's an insult to Bridgeport.
Yeah. But on top of that, the university often says, well, we create all these jobs, we create economic development, but you don't have private companies say we shouldn't pay taxes because, UI or whatever, because we create all these jobs and there's all these people that come to the city because of us. I don't think that's I don't think that's a good narrative for explaining why Yale shouldn't pay taxes.
Justin Elicker, WNHH Dateline, New Haven. Harry Joyce, our station manager, put in a question.
Is he allowed to do that?
He is.
Okay.
He's got an in. But it's the first question he's ever put up that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This is great having the mayor answer questions like this. Is he planning on doing a show on WNHH?
Sure.
Okay, Harry, you got your answer. In the meantime, one thing I've really enjoyed watching you as a reporter is how much you use new media tools to try to communicate with people. You have a weekly newsletter that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that really informs us about traffic pickup and issues you're doing. And of course, it's going to help get out a message you want. With the budget, and you have a podcast, which I think is quite well done.
It's a lot of work to put that together. We got
Yeah. I mean, I come from the school that you actually don't do podcasts, you do live radio and just distribute this podcast, but it's different goals.
Certainly
kind of way.
Easier to put that together.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And I would argue, but it's a whole different discussion about local versus national. But your video was excellent. So when you were in Alder, you put out these great videos explaining the budget. And I thought you had your chops together. When you introduced your budget, you put out a video that explained why you're doing what you're doing. You put the issues out there and you kept it to something like 5 minutes. All well done. How do you measure whether that's effective?
It's hard to measure whether that's effective other than anecdotes of people saying, "Hey, I learned something."
Well, some people are data-driven,
views,
which I'm not. So when I looked at that, it was under 1,000 views, which I believe it has nothing to do with the number of views. If someone on Reddit says, "Look what a jerk the mayor in New Haven, he's raising taxes," and then you get millions of views and a lot of nasty comments, versus 700 people in New Haven taking time to watch who are motivated to find out more, watching a 5-minute video about the budget, then having that for future reference for anyone to look at. I would argue that those metrics are deeper.
Yeah, and I think your point, I often look at the New Haven Independent when I'm trying to learn about an issue that I don't understand, and I can look at the history of it.
That's
so
great.
It's helpful to. I think that's
why we do it.
that's a very it's like an encyclopedia of New Haven, right? And so the putting the budget out there for people that are engaged and curious about it, putting that video out there is a way for me to have more of a conversation with someone about the details of what my process was.
And I learn a lot. I feel like I read every email and listen to the whole podcast, and I just really like it. Brian Maxwell, thank you for listening, Brian. One of the big challenges regarding housing is the patchwork method that City Hall uses to grant different types of zoning and building rules depending on the developer. Has your office considered, I have a bias in this one. Has your office considered easing setback rules across the board for new development to boost building size, number of units, ideally to encourage more affordable housing?
I think that generally is a good idea. I think that we have to do it in a way that neighborhoods are
that's shorthand for the staff has been trying to do that for years. They worked years on a neighborhood commercial rezoning that would have made that easier, but the neighborhood killed it in 2 places and they're starting from scratch.
Yeah, but it's not that simple, right? I think that my sense of neighborhood concerns was there was a strong question about affordability. There was a strong question about how high are these buildings going to be, and I think that you still have to get those details right. You know, what is it? Is it Dallas that doesn't have any zoning? There's some city that doesn't have any zoning. It's ridiculous. It's like, things are popping up everywhere that you wouldn't want to live next to, and you have a high rise next to a
separate
two-family house, right?
I fully disagree with you. I think zoning is evil and a tool of people with power to maintain their power, and I think that people make decisions on their own with individual judgment what should go there. I think
you're libertarian in that way. I had no idea.
I am. Yeah. I am. Even though I'm a socialist in other ways. I mean, I think that that in our city we stopped growth, we stopped affordability, and we killed commerce by well-intentioned zoning.
Zoning is almost really
always
either
evil.
or though?
No, because there are very fair compromises like redoing neighborhood zoning so that you have some kind of control over how big things are, but still let people.
Right. I think it's a balance, right?
Right.
It's a balance.
Brian Jenkins.
I keep answering these questions of it depends, and
Paul, stop drooling on him and ask him hard questions. People are hurting in the city, and some need real answers. Thank you, Brian. And Andrew Downer says
so. Brian asked the hard question.
Yeah. So what's going to be your signature public health initiative that's going to define how you've helped people with public health in this city?
Huh. Let me think about the answer to that. I would say that the things on the public health side that we're focusing on most is around opioids and substance use disorder, and I don't think that we as a community have successfully and comprehensively had a conversation about how to actually address that issue. It's something that Dr. Dalal and I have been working on, meeting with partners. We met with the App Foundation 2 weeks ago. I think that there's a lot of potential for New Haven to do something.
So Tony Arp had
very
a plan.
progressive on that.
She thought having the state fund more outreach workers, which she got started on, to deal with people like Dr. Phil, who goes on the green with the people. They talked about having a triage center, kind of a resting place around the corner from the green. Drop-in where people can dry out or get analyzed where they need to go to a hospital and things like that. What are some other thoughts?
So I think that number one, the theory should be that we need to meet people where they're at. We need to treat this substance use disorder like a disease and not criminalize it. Some people may not agree with that, but I think that many more people are starting to understand that because they have their own experiences, either themselves or with someone else that has this challenge. And so if you look at it through the lens of this is a medical issue and a medical emergency, not a criminal issue, then we should be treating people regardless of whether they have dirty urine, and meaning that they're also smoking marijuana or using other substances. We should be welcoming people into these centers, and organizations like the App Foundation. And granted, there's been some issues around the Hill, the site in the Hill North neighborhood, but they're on the cutting edge of that kind of treatment. And so thinking more progressively about how we treat people. Some other cities are doing subsidized or supervised injection facilities. Some other cities are.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that this
Those
is
are
something
really controversial.
I agree, but I think this is something that we should explore. Of how are we going to work with a community that is expanding, and we are losing our people because we're not effectively engaging with this population, and we're alienating them more often than not.
Right, we're running out of time.
Work that the police chief has done around
with the kits when you come out of the
correct, and there was some drama around the pipes, but
and also not a single one was taken because people have to give a lot of personal information they want to give, so they're working that one out.
Yeah, I mean that's a bump in the road, but the concept behind it is let's.
So we're running out of town. Justin, can I give you 2 quick questions here from people? Ronnie Williams, what about the tow company contracts that we've written about in The Independent where they've like really taken advantage of people and broken the law? Are you revisiting and thinking of canceling those contracts?
Yeah. So, Paul and I were talking about this before we went on the air here, but this is people should be treated fairly in the city. People should be treated fairly. And I've had my own issues with the tow companies and, the way that they drive around the neighborhoods, they disobey traffic laws, and they disrespect people is totally inappropriate, and we need to follow the law. Our towing companies follow the law, and so this is something that we will make a priority and address.
So funny, when I report on the stories, I do believe we've done this for decades. There's so much about it that's crooked and sleazy and take advantage of people. But the one case I looked into, I was completely on the side of the tow truck driver, the skeezy guy trying to drive away with the boot on and then blame them.
Right.
And abusing the guy. But yeah, I think there's a lot to do there. And Gary Gosselin, finally, you get the last one, Gary. What is your position? Oh, but it's a tough one to do quick. What is your position on the tweet expansion?
It's always tweet. It's always tweet.
There we go.
Well, we how am I going to get this done in 5 minutes? Right?
You got a lot less than 5 minutes.
So similar to what I have always said, or like I have always said, I will support the tweet expansion if there is a financial viability for the airport, if we address the question of sea level rise, and if we address the question of a lot of the neighborhood concerns around traffic issues. And we are having more conversations with Tweed, and Tweed's working to have more conversation with the airport to make sure that we come to an amenable solution.
Then you get agnostics like me who think both sides have doom or savior predictions that never come true, and that there might not even be a Tweed New Haven airport in 2050.
I think there's a lot of middle ground here.
All right. Justin Elicker, what a pleasure to have you on. Thanks, everyone, for those great questions. It was hopping.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
It was hopping. And I wish you the luck as mayor and dealing with some of these tough issues you're taking on in the city. Thanks for the miracle man behind the controls, WNHH station manager Harry Drost. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.